Lately, due to the release of Pal World, there has been a resurgence of people comparing Digimon to other franchises with monsters in them, such as Pokemon, Yokai Watch, and Monster Rancher. But it all seriously reminds me of the conversation of old: is Digimon a Pokemon ripoff? Now, this argument of whether Digimon copy Pokemon or vice versa, I didn't actually see much of when I was young. In primary school, that they seemed to be both fairly popular amongst my peers. Of course, people loved Pokemon. A lot of people played the card game. Everyone loved watching the anime and playing the video games. But in terms of Digimon, it was seen as a different kind of franchise because Digimon's main popularity, at least in the schools that I went to, was just the virtual pets. A lot of people just played with the Digimon virtual pets and didn't really watch the anime. The anime didn't seem to really catch on until a little bit later, more so the end of Adventure and the beginning of 02, and then a little bit of Into Tamers as well. So it had a different levels of popularity still, but I didn't personally see the which one came first, which one ripped off which one of them is a copycat, etc., etc. But I didn't actually see that until I was online many years later, when people started to say, this is a rip-off, this is a rip-off. Or, I guess later on in my childhood, when people said, hey, remember Digimon? Oh yeah, that was the show that ripped off Pokemon. So it was sort of never really said in my own personal upbringing, but a lot of people, and still some to this day, do ask which one came first and if either of them copied the other. So let's look at the comparisons between the two franchises, these Mon franchises, and let's talk about a bit of the history of their releases and if any of them copied each other. First of all, we have Pokemon, which first released in February of 1996 with the Game Boy games Pokemon Red and Green in Japan, and the TCG was released a few months later in October. And then we had the anime premiering in April 1997, and the first volume of the manga releasing in October of that same year. So yes, Pokemon did come first with the February 1996 video games, but also in 1996 Digimon did start, so let's look at Digimon's release. So first of all, the first virtual pet was in 1997 in June, so just a few months after Pokemon was first released on the Game Boy. And of course, the first Digimon virtual pet was basically a spin-off of the Tamagotchi release by Bandai, but it was going to be aimed more at boys, and instead of, basic care and love and looking after them, the main draw of the Digimon was to fight, because that was seen as more appealing to the male demographic of that wasn't buying the Tamagotchi. So trying to spread that out, where Tamagotchi was more aimed at girls, the Digimon were mainly aimed at boys. So that also brings up another point I've seen, and this is this point annoys me more than the Digimon ripped off Pokemon debate, and a lot of people say that Digimon ripped off Tamagotchi, which is obviously not true because it's by the same company and it was a spin-off. So that is something I've also seen. The people say, oh, Digimon ripped off both Pokemon and Tamagotchi, which is just like, one of those annoys me more than the other. But in any case, so after the Digimon Virtual Pet, of course, which again was just a spin-off of the Tamagotchi Virtual Pets, a one-shot manga was released around the same time, also in June of 1997. So there was that manga. And then the Digimon card game was also released in 1997 as well. And then we had the first Digimon video game, which was not Digimon World. It's actually Digital Monster version S on the Sega Saturn. And it's more or less similar to the Virtual Pet and has the Virtual Pet mechanics. And this game was released in September of 1998. So the more well-known game, however, Digimon World, was released a few months later in Japan in January of 1999. And the Digimon anime premiered in March of 1999. So we can see that they kind of had different starts, both the Pokemon and Digimon franchises, where Pokemon just started as a video game, and then later had the anime coming from the video game, Digimon started with a virtual pet and then had the video games and then of course had the anime. But the video games are very different to the Pokemon ones. At least the first two are, or the first couple are, more than a couple I guess. The first few of them I would say are more virtual pet-esque, as in Digimon World and the Sega Saturn one, and of course the version WonderSwan on obviously the WonderSwan. Those were all virtual pet raising games. Then we had Digimon World 2, which is kind of like a Mystery Dungeon-esque game, but it was before Mystery Dungeon came out, I'm fairly certain. And then we have Digimon World 2003, which is the most Pokemon of the Digimon games. You go around, you defeat basically gym leaders, and you get badges from the gym leaders, and you travel along. And then there's an evil corporation which you have to beat. So that is one of the cases where I can say, Digimon, you're looking a little bit suspicious there. Still, it's not a unique mechanic that Pokemon invented, but it is very Pokemon-esque. But other than that, the video games are fairly unique from the other Mon series being Pokemon. So the two franchises, yes, they did have different beginnings, but they ended up having an anime series, which I would assume is why a lot of people say that they copied each other or one copied the other or what have you. But in terms of their beginnings, they could not be more different. One started with the virtual pet, which Pokemon don't have many virtual pets. They have virtual pet-esque toys like the Manaphy egg, and then of course there's the Eevee-Chi, which is a Tamagotchi Nano collaboration with Pokemon. But for the most part, Pokemon steers, unfortunately, clear of virtual pets. Whereas Digimon, that's kind of like, or was, the bread and butter. There is, of course, the fact they both have card games, and Digimon has kind of had multiple card games over its time. Pokemon has just had the one main card game, whereas Digimon kind of redid their whole card game and had a new one that's been going on since 2020. And honestly, it feels like that's Bandai's focus for the franchise, but I've got many videos on that topic. So fairly different beginnings, and they've continued on fairly separately from each other, except for the fact that they both have an anime, which, again, fairly different. The Pokemon anime, until the most recent season, follows around Ash, and then the Digimon anime typically has a new cast of kids in an entirely new universe almost every season. So that's another difference that they have in terms of the anime. So there is, however, one marketing move, which I will say, and I will totally concede this point, that may have been inspired by a marketing move that Pokemon had, and that is the existence of the Digimon movie. So the Pokemon movie's release was a huge deal at the time, and Digimon wanted a similar theatrical run in English, so Saban took the 3 existing Digimon movies that were each around half an hour in length, and combined and edited them into a feature-length film. So that is the Digimon movie, which I've done many videos on before because I love this movie. So the Digimon movie's existence could be trying to capitalize on the same popularity that the Pokemon movie had at the time. And, I mean, the Digimon movie even had the Digi-Rap, whereas the Pokemon movie had the Poke-Rap. So in that case, it could be a case of Digimon wanting to say, hey, this worked really well for Pokemon, let's do it. But even then, I feel like English releases of the Digimon movie being inspired by the Pokemon movie's popularity, there's also a possibility that it was just a coincidence, since feature films of cartoons was kind of, and still is, fairly popular at the time. That is just, hey, let's get more money, let's put this show in a movie theatre. So that's sort of like, I guess, a vague possibility that it could have been just a coincidence, or it could have just been them saying, hey, let's also release a movie. But the existence of movies and just saying, hey, I'm going to make a movie, that in itself isn't really a copycat, but the Digimon movie having the Digi-Rap is a little bit, yes, rap was, kind of hip and cool at the time, but it's just a little bit too similar. Of course, the Digimon movie soundtrack has a lot of ska punk in it, so that just means it's the best soundtrack ever, but yeah, it is pretty similar. Otherwise, it strikes me as the two franchises that came out around the same time, that just so happen to have similar names are actually fairly different from each other and had fairly different beginnings. And there's still things to this day where the two franchises will have similarities. For example, and these are kind of loose, we have the mega evolutions in Pokemon, and then of course we have the fact that Pokemon and Digimon have both had live action kind of things going on in the last few years. So it's just a case of them having coincidences for the most part. I don't think Digimon necessarily ripped off Pokemon. However, if they did, it's definitely in the case of the Digimon movie and the Digirap. As much as I love the Digimon movie, the fact that it came out is probably because of the success and popularity of the Pokemon movie. At the time, anime movies that were in Japan that were like those half-an-hour long TV specials basically didn't really get a release in English, or at least didn't get one until in fact very recently, or just stayed in Japan forever because they were just those half-an-hour shorts. But I honestly think that if it was because of Pokemon, I'm glad that they did it, because otherwise we might not have got the Digimon movies that we had. We might not have got even them in their shortest form, and I guess that's pretty cool. But again, for the most part, I don't think anyone ripped off anyone else in this situation. Fairly different franchises, fairly different beginnings, and fairly different continuations. But that's basically everything I wanted to say on the matter. Let me know your thoughts, comments, questions, etc., etc. You can roast me because I'm pretty sure I randomly stumbled over some words. English is my first language. I don't know why I struggle with it so much, but I do. I can just say, hey, I'm just Australian, but sometimes it's just a little bit too much. So yeah, let me know your thoughts, comments, questions in the comments section below. Like this video for enjoying both Pokemon and Digimon, because both have strengths, both have weaknesses, and you can just enjoy a thing. At the end of the day, they're just franchises for children. Have fun with them. So in any case, subscribe if you haven't already. See, I did it again. I stumbled over an English word. Subscribe if you haven't already. There we are. It's not like I say it every single time. Subscribe if you haven't already, and if you have subscribed, tell your friends, tell your neighbours, tell your enemies. And of course, I'll see you in the next video. Bye!